The carpet in the lobby felt thick and expensive under my sensible shoes. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious. Inside, the air conditioning was a silent, relentless chill, mirroring the ice forming in my gut. My hand gripped the worn leather of my briefcase, the weight inside a strange, comforting anchor in this swirling uncertainty. I felt exposed, standing here, under the gaze of the impeccably dressed desk staff, a woman waiting not for check-in, but for a detonation. Every breath was shallow, measured. The polished marble floor reflected the distant lights, stretching out like a vast, indifferent ocean I was about to cross. There was a hum in the walls, the distant clink of glasses from the bar, sounds of a normal evening unfolding, utterly detached from the seismic event I was about to trigger. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, yet my hands were steady, my gaze fixed on the entrance to the hotel bar, where I knew he would be.
And she.
Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Before the cold marble, before the calculated step, there was just the quiet house. Our house. Filled with the ghosts of routines that no longer made sense. The faint smell of his coffee lingered in the kitchen long after he'd left for work. My side of the bed was always neat, his perpetually rumpled, a map of his restless nights I had never learned to read. We existed in parallel, two satellites orbiting a dead star, held together by inertia and the faded gravity of history. We had built a life brick by slow brick, years cementing us into a comfortable, predictable pattern. Dinner at 6, the same sofa spots, the low murmur of the television. It wasn't passionate love, not anymore, perhaps not for a long time. It was companionship, a shared address, a mutual dependency forged over decades of shared bills, shared chores, shared silence. I had mistaken that silence for peace. I had mistaken the absence of conflict for contentment. I wanted simple things. Stability.
Trust.
A quiet assurance that the ground beneath my feet wouldn't suddenly crumble. I wanted the man I married to be the man who still woke up beside me. The man who would eventually return to the house that now felt like a museum of our defunct life. The call came on a Tuesday. Just another Tuesday. I was watering the plants on the porch, the ones he never remembered to water, a small, quiet resentment I carried like a pebble in my shoe. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had. A woman's voice, hesitant, then hardening. Are you Mr. Davies' wife? My stomach dropped. Not a telemarketer. Not a wrong number. The phrasing was too specific, too loaded. I am, I said, my voice suddenly dry. He's been seeing my husband. The world tilted. Not what I expected. Not at all. My husband? With a man? The thought was so foreign, so completely outside the realm of possibility I had constructed, that for a second, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like, that was the problem?
Oh.
Okay. But the woman on the phone quickly clarified, her voice now shaking with its own pain. No, not seeing him like that. He's seeing my husband. My husband is with him. They are together. The words hung in the air, heavy, incomprehensible. My husband. With her husband. It took a moment for the truth to untangle itself from the shock. Not a gay affair. A straight one. My husband with her husband's wife. The woman's voice broke. She's his secretary.
Claire.
Your husband, James, and Claire. They are having an affair. The pebble in my shoe became a boulder in my chest.
Claire.
His new secretary.
Young. Bright.
Too cheerful. I had met her once at a company dinner. She had laughed too loudly at his jokes. My eyes must have glazed over. The rest of the conversation was a blur of whispered details, dates, places, shared suspicions, two strangers connected by a sudden, brutal demolition of their respective lives. We exchanged numbers, promises to talk more, to figure things out. I hung up the phone, the receiver heavy in my hand, the porch plants forgotten, water spilling onto the wood, a small, irrelevant flood in the face of the tsunami that had just hit. He came home that night, oblivious or pretending to be. The same tie, slightly askew. The same weary sigh as he kicked off his shoes. He asked about my day, a question purely out of habit, his eyes already scanning the newspaper. I watched him, really watched him for the first time in years. The lines around his eyes weren't from stress, they were from secrets. The easy smile felt plastic. The man I thought I knew was a stranger. How do you ask a question that will shatter your world? How do you ask, are you having an affair with your secretary? I didn't. Not directly. I couldn't find the words. My throat was choked with dust. Instead, I asked about Claire. How's Claire? The new secretary? He didn't look up from the paper.
Fine.
Efficient. Efficient. The word landed like a tiny insult. Was that how he saw women? As efficient? Was that all I was to him? I spent the next few days in a fog. The house was too quiet, the silence amplified by the unspoken truth humming between us. I checked his phone when he was in the shower. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through messages. Nothing obvious.
He was smart.
Too smart. I checked his work email on the shared computer. Again, nothing. Encrypted? Deleted? He was careful. I met the other wife for coffee.
Sarah.
Her pain was a mirror of mine, but sharper, less contained. Her husband was a wreck, she said. He loved Claire. He didn't know how to live without her. He was begging Claire to leave James, to be with him. My James, it turned out, was the obstacle in their love story. It felt grotesque. My stable, boring husband, the villain in someone else's grand romance. Sarah had more details, whispered over lukewarm lattes. Shared lunches. Late nights at the office. Weekends away, supposedly for work conferences that never existed. She showed me pictures she'd found on her husband's cloud storage. Claire and James, laughing, holding hands, looking like two teenagers in love. The images burned my eyes. This wasn't a fling. This was something real, something deeper than I had imagined. Deeper than I had ever experienced with him, it seemed. The images broke me. Not the fact of the affair, I already knew that intellectually. But the intimacy in their eyes, the way they leaned into each other, the casual ease of their affection. It was a life he was building with her, in parallel to the life he was still living with me. I confronted him that night.
No subtlety.
No gentle leading questions. Just the raw, ugly truth laid bare. I know about Claire. He froze. The newspaper lowered slowly. His face went pale, then flushed red. Guilt?
No.
Anger. Annoyance. How dare I disrupt his carefully constructed lie? What are you talking about? He said, his voice tight. I know about Claire. Sarah called me. I've seen the pictures. He stared at me, his eyes hard. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger, cold and calculating. He didn't deny it. There was no point. Yes, he said, eventually. The word was flat, devoid of emotion. I'm seeing Claire.
No apology. No explanation.
Just the bald admission. My carefully contained composure began to crack. Seeing her? James, you're having an affair. Semantics, he said, waving a dismissive hand. My mouth fell open. Semantics? The destruction of my marriage, of my trust, of my entire reality, was just a matter of semantics. How long? I whispered. A while.
A while.
Months? A year?
Years?
He wouldn't give me a number.
He wouldn't give me anything.
Then came the words that would echo in my mind for weeks, the words that ignited a cold fire in my gut. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, looking at me not with regret, but with impatience. Look, he said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. This is happening. It's part of life.
People change.
Situations change. You need to be mature about this.
Mature.
He told me to be mature about his betrayal. He wanted me to gracefully accept that the man I built a life with was sleeping with his secretary. He wanted me to sit down, sip my tea, and have a rational conversation about the logistics of dissolving my world because he was bored or restless or genuinely in love with someone else. He wanted me to make it easy for him, to cause no fuss, to protect his reputation, his comfort, his desire to move seamlessly from one life to the next.
Mature.
The word felt like a slap. It wasn't maturity he wanted. It was convenience. He wanted me to disappear quietly so he could live happily ever after. He wanted to paint me as the hysterical, difficult wife if I didn't comply. I tried. At first, I tried to be mature. I suggested therapy. For us. For him.
He scoffed.
Therapy won't change how I feel. I suggested separation, calmly, discussing logistics. He was agreeable, too agreeable. He talked about assets, about splitting things. But there was a glint in his eye, a subtle shift in his tone. He started talking about his assets, his company, how he had built everything. He was subtly laying claim to everything, framing me as someone who had merely been there while he did the hard work. The implication was clear. I would get scraps. He would walk away with the empire he had built, and his new life with Claire would be funded by the wealth I had helped him accumulate, the wealth earned during the years I was just his wife. My attempts at maturity were met with thinly veiled contempt. He became bolder, speaking on the phone to Claire late at night, leaving hints of their life together scattered around the house like breadcrumbs designed to torment me. A foreign concert ticket stub. A restaurant receipt from a city they were supposedly visiting for work. He was rubbing my face in it, daring me to react. I reacted internally. The pain was a physical weight, crushing my chest, stealing my sleep. I cried in the shower, the water washing away the tears before he could see them. I screamed into pillows. I felt a profound, soul-deep grief for the man I lost, the marriage that died, the future I had planned that evaporated overnight. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir. A cold, hard knot of anger. And then a chilling calm. He wanted maturity?
Fine.
I would give him maturity. But it wouldn't be the quiet, compliant kind he expected. It would be the kind that dissected his life with surgical precision. The midpoint shift wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was a slow, deliberate turning of a key. I stopped looking at him as my husband who had betrayed me. I started looking at him as an opponent. And in any conflict, you need to understand your opponent's weaknesses. His weakness, I realized, was his arrogance. His absolute certainty that he was untouchable, that he was the only intelligent person in the room, that I was too naive, too emotional, too dependent to fight back effectively. He saw my hurt as weakness. He saw my attempts at calm discussion as submission. He had underestimated me.
Terribly.
The turning point solidified during a particularly galling conversation. We were discussing finances. He was outlining his plans, his voice smooth, patronizing. He spoke of restructuring assets, of trusts, of protecting his future. He talked about a prenuptial agreement we had signed years ago, a standard document he insisted was ironclad, leaving me with almost nothing if we divorced. I barely remembered signing it.
It seemed so irrelevant then.
So, you'll be fine, he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. You won't want for anything. You'll have the house for now. And an allowance. Like I was a child. He spoke about Claire, not by name, but as my partner. He spoke of their plans, their future, their synergy in business. It was clear he intended to install her not just in my place in his life, but potentially in a key role in his company. The company we had built, side by side, for years, through late nights and lean times, sacrificing our youth and energy. He had forgotten those years. He saw only his own efforts now. As he spoke, my mind raced. The prenup, the company, his arrogance. He was so focused on the big picture, on protecting his empire, he might have overlooked the details. The mundane, boring details. The ones he always left to me. Paperwork, filing, small accounts, signatures. Suddenly, I saw a path. Not a path of emotional begging or legal wrangling over sentimental items. A path that struck at the very core of his confidence, his perceived invincibility. A path that used his own blind spots against him. I needed help. Not therapy. Not a mediator. I needed a shark. A legal shark. I found her through Sarah, oddly enough. Sarah's husband, despite his heartbreak, was a corporate lawyer. He couldn't represent me, obviously, but he knew people. He recommended a woman known for being ruthless, meticulous, and utterly discreet. Her name was Ms. Hansen. Her office was minimalist, cold, and strangely calming. It felt like a fortress. I sat across from her, laid out the situation. The affair, his dismissal of my feelings, his insistence on maturity, the prenup, his plans with Claire, his obvious financial maneuvering. I told her about his arrogance, his belief that I was incapable of understanding the complexities of his business dealings. Ms. Hansen listened, her face unreadable. She asked precise, clinical questions. About dates, about money transfers, about specific accounts, about documents I might have access to. As I answered, my vague suspicions began to form into concrete points of inquiry. He mentioned a specific account. I said, remembering a casual conversation years ago. For international investments. He called it the Future Fund or something. Ms. Hansen made a note. And his company, how is it structured? I explained what I knew. Complex. Layers. Subsidiaries. Trusts. All the things I had signed without really understanding, trusting him. Trust, Ms. Hansen said, her voice dry. An expensive commodity. She outlined a strategy. Not a messy divorce fight. Something surgical. Focused. We needed proof. Not just of the affair, that was legally secondary, relevant only in specific jurisdictions, and even then, often just affecting the pace, not the outcome. We needed proof of his financial manipulations, his attempts to hide or undervalue assets, to use company funds improperly for personal gain, or potentially for Claire. We needed to find the blind spot in his arrogance. This meant research. Days turned into weeks. I became a detective in my own life. Poring over old bank statements, tax returns, company reports he had left lying around, digital files buried deep in shared drives. The mundane suddenly became fascinating, imbued with the weight of his betrayal. I looked for inconsistencies, for unusual transfers, for patterns that didn't fit. Every late night at the office suddenly felt like a potential opportunity for him to move money, to sign documents I didn't see. He noticed I was quieter, less emotional. He seemed pleased. Good, he said one morning, with a hint of approval. You're starting to be mature. He had no idea. My maturity was a weapon I was sharpening in secret. I continued to live in the house, to go through the motions. The quiet house was no longer a museum. It was a battlefield where I gathered intelligence. He was so confident in his control, his superiority, he didn't see me as a threat. He saw me as a problem to be managed, an inconvenience that would eventually fade away. The deepening crisis wasn't external. It was the internal fear that I was wrong, that he was right, that he was too powerful, too smart, that I would walk away with nothing, having spent years building a life only to have it stolen and used to fund his happiness with another woman. There were moments of despair, sitting alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the physical remnants of our life together, feeling utterly adrift. What if Ms. Hansen found nothing? What if the prenup was ironclad? What if he had covered every single track? The thought was suffocating. He became bolder with Claire. She started appearing at company events I was still expected to attend. The looks they exchanged, the casual touches, the way she would subtly undermine me in conversation, it was designed to hurt, to provoke. I smiled, nodded, played the part of the gracious wife slowly accepting her fate. Every encounter fueled my resolve. Claire wasn't just the woman he cheated with. She was a symbol of his contempt for me, for our history. Then Ms. Hansen found it. It wasn't a massive, illegal offshore account. It was smaller, more insidious. A pattern of transfers from a less visible subsidiary account to a shell corporation, disguised as consulting fees. The shell corporation was registered overseas, but Ms. Hansen's team traced it back. It wasn't paying consultants. It was purchasing assets, real estate, cars, investments, in the name of a nominee company. And buried deep in the convoluted paperwork, a name appeared, not his, but Claire's. Not directly. Not her name on the ownership documents, but her name on specific directives, authorizations, communications related to the Shell Corporation. Emails from his work account to a private email address, discussing transactions, approvals, using coded language, but undeniably linking Claire to the flow of funds from his company. Funds that were being diverted, essentially embezzled, and used to acquire assets being placed, indirectly, under Claire's control. This wasn't just an affair. This was him using company money to set up his mistress financially, potentially bypassing tax laws, and certainly breaching his fiduciary duty to his own company and, more importantly, any partners or investors he might have had. This wasn't just cheating, this was potentially fraud. The prenup didn't cover this. It governed the division of our marital assets. It didn't protect him from legal action for corporate malfeasance or financial impropriety using company funds. And it certainly didn't look good to investors, business partners, or the tax authorities. The cold knot in my stomach hardened into steel. This was the leverage. This was his blind spot. He was so focused on protecting his existing wealth from me, he had overreached, using company resources in a way that was not only unethical, but potentially illegal. He thought he was building their future securely, out of my reach. He was actually building it on a foundation of sand, using stolen bricks. Ms. Hansen laid out the turning point. We could expose this, quietly through legal channels or with a little more public visibility. The latter, she suggested, would have a more immediate and devastating impact on his reputation, his business, and his future with Claire. It would also serve as a powerful deterrent against him trying any further tricks. We decided on a targeted approach, a public confrontation, but with a clear legal framework behind it. A moment designed not just to shock him, but to expose him at his most vulnerable, surrounded by the symbols of the life he was trying to build with Claire, the life he was building with my resources. The hotel. He was taking Claire there for a weekend. A romantic getaway, booked under a company account, no doubt. Sarah had given me the dates, the hotel name. Claire's husband was still hopelessly trying to win her back, tracking her movements, unknowingly providing me with crucial intelligence. Ms. Hansen agreed. The element of surprise was key. He needed to be blindsided. He needed to be confronted when he felt most secure, most triumphant. The day of the confrontation, I woke up feeling oddly calm. The frantic bird in my chest had quieted. It was replaced by a steady, rhythmic beat, like a drum preparing for battle. I dressed carefully, not in grieving black, but in a crisp, professional suit. Not for him. For me. For Ms. Hansen.
For the statement I was about to make.
I wasn't the weeping wife anymore. I was an equal, armed with facts and legal power. Ms. Hansen met me downstairs. She was taller than I remembered, her presence radiating competence and authority. She carried a single slim folder. Inside were the documents, the evidence of his deceit. We arrived at the hotel. The same thick carpet, the same cool air, the same indifferent city sounds. We confirmed his reservation. He and Claire were in the bar, waiting for their room to be ready. He's in the bar, the desk clerk said, pointing vaguely. My heart gave a little lurch, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The kind you feel right before a storm breaks. Ms. Hansen gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Shall we? We walked towards the bar. Soft lighting, quiet chatter, the clinking of glasses. And there they were, sitting at a small table by the window, laughing, leaning into each other. Claire in a bright dress, animated. James, my husband, looking younger, happier than he had in years. He was holding her hand across the table. My world distilled into a single, nauseating image. He saw me first. The smile froze on his face. His eyes widened. His hand dropped Claire's as if burned. Claire turned, following his gaze, her expression shifting from amusement to confusion, then to dawning horror as she recognized me. I didn't say a word. I just walked towards them, Ms. Hansen a silent, formidable presence at my side. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. The distance across the bar felt infinite, charged with years of unspoken resentments, lies, And now, impending reckoning. We stopped beside their table. The laughter in the bar seemed to dim, the other patrons fading into a blur. It was just the four of us, suspended in time. James found his voice, a choked whisper. What are you doing here? His eyes darted from me to Miss Hanson, then back to me, panic starting to bloom on his face.
Claire just stared, wide-eyed.
I looked him dead in the eye. The man who told me to be mature. The man who thought he could steal my life and build a new one on the ruins, funded by theft. I'm here, I said, my voice steady calm, to discuss our divorce. His face drained of color. Claire made a small, wounded sound. Here, he stammered. Now? Why did you bring? He gestured frantically at Ms. Hanson. Ms. Hanson stepped forward, her voice clear and projectable, cutting through the quiet hum of the bar. Mr. Davies, she said, her tone polite, professional, yet utterly devastating. My name is Eleanor Hanson. I am Mrs. Davies' attorney. We have some questions regarding certain financial transactions involving company funds, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, and significant asset purchases linked, via documented communication, to Ms. Claire Matthews here. She held up the slim folder. It looked innocuous. It held the power to shatter his world. His eyes fixed on the folder, on Ms. Hanson's face. His jaw went slack. Claire gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. What are you talking about? James croaked, though the panic in his eyes showed he knew exactly what she was talking about. Ms. Hanson didn't raise her voice. She spoke with calm authority, each word a hammer blow. We have documentation, Mr. Davies. Emails, transaction records, corporate filings. It appears that substantial company funds have been diverted to purchase assets for Ms. Matthews, disguised as consulting fees. This raises serious questions about corporate malfeasance, breach of fiduciary duty, and potential tax evasion. This is not just a matter for divorce court, Mr. Davies. This is a matter for corporate investigators, potentially the tax authorities, and any partners or investors who may have been defrauded. She paused, letting the words sink in. The color had completely left his face. He was trembling visibly. Claire looked like she was about to faint. The prenup you mentioned, Ms. Hanson continued smoothly, while it governs the division of marital assets, does not protect you from the consequences of using company funds for personal gain, particularly not when those funds are being directed to a non-employee, non-shareholder mistress, disguised as legitimate business expenses. The word mistress hung in the air, clinical and brutal. We are prepared, Ms. Hanson said, her voice softening slightly, though the effect was more chilling than comforting, to pursue this through all available legal channels, including reporting these activities to the relevant regulatory bodies and informing your business partners. This, Mr. Davies, could have a significant impact on your company, your reputation, and your future prospects. She paused again, letting the weight of her words crush him. He looked from her to me, his eyes pleading, disbelieving. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. He had thought he was so smart, so untouchable. He hadn't seen this coming. Not in his wildest nightmares. He had underestimated me completely. He thought I would just cry and demand alimony. He never imagined I would understand his world well enough to dismantle it. However, Ms. Hanson continued, offering the razor's edge of a deal. Mrs. Davies is willing to negotiate a settlement. A significantly different settlement than the one you proposed. One that reflects not only the marital assets, but also the compensation for the damage caused by your financial impropriety and the potential legal exposure you face. She wasn't just taking half of what he had. She was demanding a significant portion, framed as compensation to avoid legal ruin. This wasn't just divorce, it was a financial dismantling. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His hands clenched the edge of the table. Claire was staring at him, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. She hadn't signed up for this. She had signed up for the rich, successful man, the exciting new life. She hadn't signed up for potential fraud investigations and the public collapse of his empire. We require your full cooperation, Ms. Hanson stated, her voice firm. Access to all relevant accounts and documents. Agreement to a comprehensive settlement that ensures Mrs. Davies is justly compensated and you are held accountable for your actions. If you agree, we can manage this discreetly, limiting the damage to your business. If you refuse, she let the implication hang. Ruin. James stared at the folder, at Miss Hanson, at me. His chest hitched. He made a sound, a choked, guttural noise. His face crumpled. He pushed away from the table, knocking over a glass with a crash. It shattered on the floor, a sharp, loud sound that cut through the sudden silence in the bar. He didn't fall, not completely. But he sagged, leaning heavily on the table, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He wasn't collapsing from emotional pain. He was collapsing under the weight of his exposed lies, his destroyed plans, the complete, unexpected reversal of fortune. The man who had told me to be mature about his affair was a broken, terrified figure. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man who had just realized he had lost everything he truly valued: his control, his reputation, his wealth, and the future he thought he had secured with his mistress. Claire scrambled up from the table, whispering his name, but her voice was laced with fear, not comfort. This wasn't the script she had signed up for. She looked at me with a flicker of something that might have been fear, or maybe even a twisted kind of respect. I hadn't just played his game. I had rewritten the rules. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. There was a cold satisfaction, yes. A sense of vindication. He had tried to discard me, to leave me with nothing, to build his happiness on my pain. And I had turned the tables. I hadn't just survived. I had ensured he would pay a heavy price. But watching him collapse, not from grief for our lost life, but from the fear of losing his money and status, felt profoundly sad. It was the final confirmation of what he truly valued. It wasn't me. It wasn't our history. It wasn't even, it seemed, Claire, beyond what she represented for his ego and his plans. It was the empire he had built, the power he wielded. And I had just shown him how easily it could crumble. I turned away from the table. There was nothing more to say. Ms. Hanson would handle the rest. The battle in the bar was over. The war for my life, however, was just beginning. Stepping out of the cold hotel air back into the humid city night felt like emerging from a long, stifling dream. The victory was sharp, clean, delivered with surgical precision, just as Ms. Hanson promised. He was broken, blindsided. The man who wanted me to be mature was left picking up the pieces of his ruined plans, while I, the supposedly naive wife, walked away with not just my dignity, but also a significant portion of the financial security he had tried to steal. The silence in the car on the way home was different from the silence of the quiet house. This silence felt earned. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of the past and the possibilities of a future. The anger was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a strange sense of liberation. I had faced the storm, not by weathering it passively, but by harnessing its power. The house was still quiet when I arrived, but it no longer felt like a museum or a battlefield. It felt like a space waiting to be remade. The ghosts of our shared life hadn't vanished, but their power had diminished. They were memories now, fading photos on a wall, not active participants in my present. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The divorce proceedings, even with the leverage we had, were emotionally taxing. Dealing with him, even when he was subdued and cooperative under Ms. Hanson's pressure, was a constant reminder of the betrayal. Claire disappeared from his life surprisingly quickly after the hotel confrontation. It seemed her interest hadn't extended to shared financial scandals. There were moments of profound loneliness, of grief for the life that had died. The victory felt cold sometimes, devoid of warmth. But it was mine. I had taken back control. I hadn't just gotten a settlement. I had exposed a lie and demanded accountability. I hadn't just survived. I had fought back, strategically and effectively. He wanted maturity. I gave him consequence. I learned that maturity isn't quiet suffering. It's understanding the game, finding the weakness, and striking when they least expect it. It's protecting yourself, even when it means dismantling the life you thought you wanted. The future isn't clear yet. There are scars, of course. Trust isn't an easy thing to rebuild, either with others or within yourself. But the fear is gone. The dependency is gone. I stand on my own 2 feet now, on ground I secured myself. The quiet house is just a house now. And it's mine. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.